Kyoto-den, a seed of faith. Picture this, if you will. It is the 15th day of the third month in the year 1415. The cherry blossoms are beginning their brief, perfect dance above the ancient capital of Kyoto. In the pre-dawn darkness, before even the temple bells have begun their morning song, a child draws his first breath in a world that will never quite be the same. His name is Rennyo, and though he cannot know it yet, lying there in swaddled silk, he will one day understand something about faith that eludes most of us. Something about planting seeds in ground that seems impossibly hard, and trusting in harvests we may never live to see. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You've put down your phone now, haven't you? That last email answered, that final calculation made. The weight you carry feels particularly heavy tonight, doesn't it? All those decisions waiting for tomorrow, all those people depending on what you're building. Let me take you somewhere else for a while, somewhere where another kind of builder once lay awake, wrestling with questions that might sound familiar to your own restless mind. The Kyoto of 1415 is a city of whispers and shadows. Paper screens filter moonlight into geometric patterns across tatami floors. The air carries the lingering scent of sandalwood from evening prayers, mixed with the earthier smell of cherrywood fires burning low in braziers. In the distance, the Kamo River murmurs its ancient song, the same melody it sang when this city was young, the same it will sing long after all of us are dust. The Honganji Temple sits like a sleeping giant in the Yamashina district. Its curved rooflines cut elegant silhouettes against the star-scattered sky. Within its walls, generations of monks have sought enlightenment through ritual and repetition, through the careful copying of sutras and the precise arrangement of offerings. It is a world of order, of hierarchy, of knowing one's place. And yet, there is something stirring here, something that will not be contained by tradition or satisfied by the way things have always been done. The child born this night is not just any child. He is the great-grandson of Shinran, the revolutionary monk who dared to suggest that enlightenment was not the exclusive province of the learned and the wealthy. Shinran taught that even the humblest farmer, even the most burdened merchant, could find salvation through simple faith. Through saying, with genuine heart, "I take refuge in Amida Buddha." It was a radical idea, dangerous even. For if salvation could be found through faith alone, what need was there for the elaborate ceremonies, the expensive offerings, the entire apparatus of institutional Buddhism that had grown fat on the spiritual needs of the people? Young Rennyo will inherit this legacy. But inheritance, as you well know, is both gift and burden. The weight of what came before, the pressure of what must come next. Listen, can you hear it? The soft shuffle of silk against tatami as his mother, Sonyo, adjusts his sleeping form. She is not the official wife of Zonyo, the temple's current leader. Her status is precarious, her son's future uncertain. In a world where legitimacy matters, where bloodlines determine destiny, Rennyo begins life already marked as an outsider. Perhaps this is fitting. Perhaps the greatest builders are always those who start on the margins, who understand what it means to fight for every inch of ground. The temple stirs to life as dawn approaches. The deep bronze voice of the morning bell rolls across the city, calling the faithful to prayer. Footsteps pad along wooden corridors. Somewhere, a monk begins the rhythmic chanting of the Nembutsu. Namu Amida Butsu, Namu Amida Butsu. The phrase that means "I take refuge in Amida Buddha," repeated like a heartbeat, like breath itself. But even as the familiar rituals unfold, there are tensions brewing. The established Buddhist schools, the Tendai sect with their mountain fortress at Mount Hiei, the Zen masters with their austere meditation halls, they watch the growing influence of Shinran's teachings with concern. This idea of salvation through faith alone, it threatens the natural order. It suggests that perhaps the common people don't need intermediaries, don't need the complex theological structures that have sustained religious authority for centuries. It's a pattern you might recognize. The way established players resist innovation. The way they circle their wagons when someone suggests there might be a better way, a more accessible path, a solution that serves people rather than institutions. Young Rennyo sleeps through these first hours of his life, unaware of the forces already shaping his destiny. The morning light creeps across the temple grounds, illuminating gardens where every stone has been placed with intention, where every path leads somewhere meaningful. Cherry petals drift down like snow, beautiful and ephemeral, a reminder that all things pass, but some things endure. His father, Rennyo, is a good man but not a great leader. He maintains the temple, preserves the teachings, keeps the flame burning. But he lacks the vision, the fire, the willingness to risk everything for the chance to build something truly transformative. He is a caretaker, not a revolutionary. This, too, might sound familiar. How many of us inherit something good and struggle with the question of whether to preserve it safely or risk it all in pursuit of something greater? The political landscape of Japan in 1415 is fractured, unstable. The Ashikaga shogunate rules in name, but real power is scattered among competing daimyo, regional lords who shift alliances like weather vanes in a storm. It is a time of uncertainty, of opportunity, of danger. The kind of era that either crushes dreamers or transforms them into legends. In such times, people hunger for meaning, for something to believe in that transcends the chaos of daily survival. They work their rice fields and tend their shops and raise their children. But in the quiet moments, lying awake at night, walking alone at dawn, they wonder about purpose, about whether their struggles matter in some larger scheme. This is the world Rennyo is born into. A world not so different from yours, really. The technology changes, the costumes evolve, but the fundamental questions remain the same. How do we build something meaningful? How do we serve others while surviving ourselves? How do we plant seeds of change in ground that seems determined to reject them? The incense burns lower in the temple halls. The morning prayers conclude with the soft rustle of robes as monks bow in unison. Outside, Kyoto awakens to another day of commerce and politics, of small triumphs and smaller defeats. Merchants arrange their wares in the morning markets. Artisans bend over their work, perfecting crafts passed down through generations. Mothers nurse their children and wonder what kind of world they're raising them for. And in the Honganji, a baby sleeps, carrying in his tiny fists the seeds of a revolution he cannot yet imagine. A revolution that will not be won with swords or political maneuvering, but with something far more powerful and far more dangerous. The simple, radical idea that every person matters, that every heart can find its way to truth, that faith itself can move mountains. The cherry blossoms continue their ancient dance outside his window. Each petal that falls carries with it a lesson about impermanence, about the courage required to bloom fully even when you know the season is brief. Perhaps this is the first teaching young Rennyo receives, that beauty and meaning are not diminished by their temporary nature, but made more precious because of it. What you're building, it too will be temporary in the grand scheme of things. The companies we create, the movements we start, the changes we champion, they all have their seasons, but that doesn't make them less important. If anything, it makes the building more urgent, more sacred. The sun climbs higher over Kyoto, painting the temple roofs in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere in the city, other children are being born, other stories beginning. But there is something different about this one, something that will ripple outward through the centuries like stones thrown into still water. Rennyo will grow up knowing he is different, knowing he must prove himself worthy of the legacy he carries. He will study harder than his peers, listen more carefully to the teachings, wrestle more deeply with questions that have no easy answers. And slowly, gradually, he will begin to understand that his inheritance is not just a set of beliefs to preserve, but a living flame to kindle in other hearts. The morning settles into its rhythm. Temple life continues its measured pace, but change is coming, carried in the breath of a sleeping child, planted like a seed in the fertile darkness of uncertainty. Sometimes the most important revolutions begin not with grand declarations or dramatic gestures, but with a single person willing to see the world differently, willing to ask uncomfortable questions, willing to risk everything they've inherited for the chance to build something better. As we'll discover, Rennyo's story is far from over. It's barely begun. The scholar's path, questioning the norm. The years pass like water over stones, wearing away the sharp edges of childhood, revealing the shape of the man beneath. Young Rennyo grows within the walls of Honganji, but his mind wanders far beyond those boundaries. You know this feeling, don't you? that restless hunger that comes when the answers you're given no longer satisfy the questions burning inside you, when the weight you carry demands more than inherited wisdom, when what you're building requires you to dig deeper, to question everything. By his 15th year, Rennyo has mastered the traditional texts. His calligraphy flows like silk across rice paper. His recitation of the sutras is flawless, each syllable precise as a temple bell. The other monks nod approvingly. Here is a young man following the proper path, they say. Here is tradition preserved. But in the quiet hours before dawn, when the temple sleeps and even the cicadas have fallen silent, Rennyo sits alone in his study. A single oil lamp flickers, casting dancing shadows across scrolls and commentaries that have been copied and recopied for generations. The same interpretations, the same explanations, the same limitations. He opens the larger sutra, one of the foundational texts of Pure Land Buddhism. His fingers trace the characters his great-grandfather Shinran had studied decades before. But where others see settled doctrine, Rennyo sees questions. Where others find comfort in established interpretation, he finds incompleteness. The lamp gutters. Outside, a nightbird calls across the temple grounds, its voice carrying a loneliness that echoes something deep within him. This is the hour when leaders like you know well. When the day's demands have finally quieted, but the mind refuses to rest. When the real work begins. Rennyo reads about Amida Buddha's infinite compassion, about the pure land that awaits the faithful, about salvation through faith alone, not through ritual or meditation or scholarly achievement. Beautiful concepts, profound truths, but delivered through a system that has grown rigid, hierarchical, distant from the very people it claims to serve. He sets down the scroll and rubs his tired eyes. The other monks, the temple hierarchy, they speak of these teachings as if they were precious jewels to be locked away in golden boxes, admired from a distance, interpreted only by the learned, accessible only to those who can navigate the complex maze of Buddhist scholarship and social position. But his great-grandfather Shinran had taught something different. Shinran had spoken of a Buddha's love that reached everyone, farmers and merchants, women and outcasts, the educated and the illiterate, the powerful and the powerless. A compassion that didn't require years of study or perfect understanding of doctrine. Night after night, Rennyo returns to this study. This small room becomes his laboratory, his workshop, his place of revolution. Just as you might retreat to your own quiet space when the weight you carry demands honest reflection, when what you're building requires you to strip away assumptions and examine the foundations, he begins to see the gap, the terrible widening gap between the pure teachings and their practical application, between the promise of universal salvation and the reality of an increasingly exclusive religious establishment, between what Buddhism could be and what it has become. The Jodo Shinshu tradition, the true Pure Land school founded by Shinran, speaks of Tariki, other power. The radical idea that salvation comes not through our own efforts, our own merit, our own spiritual achievements, but through complete reliance on Amida Buddha's boundless compassion. It's a teaching that should humble the proud and lift up the fallen. That should make the temple doors swing wide open, not narrow into guarded gates. But somewhere along the way, even this school of universal compassion has begun to calcify. The revolutionary message has been wrapped in layers of institutional protection. The fire has been banked, controlled, made safe. Rennyo feels this tension in his bones, in his blood, in the very air he breathes within these temple walls. One evening, as cherry blossoms drift past his window like snow, he encounters a group of farmers who have traveled from a distant village. They kneel outside the temple gates, not daring to enter. Their clothes are rough, their hands calloused from honest work. They have questions about faith, about death, about whether there is hope for people like them in the Pure Land teachings. The senior monks speak to them briefly, formally. They offer prescribed blessings and traditional formulas. But Rennyo watches their faces, sees the confusion, the distance, the sense that these profound truths are somehow not meant for them, that they lack the education, the social standing, the proper preparation to truly understand. The farmers bow gratefully and depart, but their questions hang in the air like incense smoke. Unanswered, unaddressed, unresolved. That night, Rennyo cannot sleep. He paces his small room, the weight of realization settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. This is what his great-grandfather had fought against. This gradual drift toward exclusivity, toward making the infinite finite, toward building walls where there should be bridges. He thinks of you, centuries in the future, facing your own version of this challenge. How easy it becomes to let what you're building drift from its original purpose. How the systems meant to serve a mission can gradually become barriers to that very mission. How success itself can sometimes obscure the reasons you began. The text spread before him seemed to pulse with unspoken possibilities. What if the teachings were presented differently? What if the profound truths of Pure Land Buddhism could be shared in language that farmers and merchants could understand? What if the temple doors could truly open wide? But such thoughts are dangerous. The established Buddhist schools watch Jodo Shinshu carefully, looking for any sign of deviation from acceptable doctrine. The political authorities maintain a delicate balance between competing religious factions. Change, even positive change, threatens stability. Innovation, even necessary innovation, risks everything. Rennyo knows this. He feels the weight of 5 generations of careful building, of slow acceptance, of gradual legitimacy. His family has worked for decades to establish Honganji as a respected temple. To throw that away for an uncertain vision, to risk everything they've built for the possibility of something better. Yet the questions will not be silenced. The gap between promise and practice will not be ignored. The faces of those farmers, the hunger in their eyes for spiritual truth they could grasp and hold, haunts his meditation. He begins to write. Not formal treatises or scholarly commentaries, but simple explanations. Clear words about complex truths. Letters that might speak to ordinary hearts about extraordinary love. Pages that bridge the gap between the pure land and the rice field, between Buddha's compassion and human need. The lamp burns lower. Outside, the first hint of dawn touches the eastern sky. Soon, the temple will wake to another day of prescribed routine, traditional observance, careful maintenance of established order. But in this small room, in these quiet hours, something new is taking shape. Not a rejection of the past, but a return to its deepest purpose. Not a destruction of tradition, but a restoration of its original fire. Rennyo sets down his brush and flexes his cramped fingers. The weight he carries feels different now. Still heavy but purposeful. Still challenging but clear. He is beginning to understand what he might be called to build and what it might cost him to build it. The path ahead remains uncertain. The risks are real. The opposition will be fierce. But in the growing light of morning, he can see something his great-grandfather Shinran would recognize. The dangerous, necessary, beautiful work of making the infinite accessible to finite hearts. The revolution is no longer a distant possibility. It has begun in the most powerful place revolutions can begin. In the mind of someone willing to see the world as it could be, not just as it is. The calligrapher's heart, writing for the people. The morning light filters through the paper screens of his study, casting soft patterns across the low writing desk where Rennyo sits in contemplation. Before him lies a sheet of handmade paper, its surface unmarked, waiting. In his right hand, a bamboo brush, its tip dark with fresh ink. But he does not write. Not yet. He thinks of the merchant who approached him yesterday after evening prayers, a man whose hands bore the calluses of honest work, whose eyes held the particular weariness you recognize. The weight of responsibility for others, the quiet desperation of someone seeking something beyond the endless cycle of worry and obligation. Master, the man had said, I cannot read the sutras. The priests speak in words I do not understand. How can someone like me find peace? How indeed? The question hangs in the morning air like incense smoke, persistent and penetrating. For centuries, the profound truths of the Buddha have been locked away behind walls of classical Chinese, wrapped in the ornate language of court scholars, accessible only to those with years of education and leisure to study. The very people who most need these teachings, the farmers rising before dawn to tend their rice fields, the mothers nursing sick children through long nights, the merchants calculating whether they can survive another lean season. They are shut out by language itself. Rennyo dips his brush and begins to write, not in the formal Chinese characters that mark scholarly discourse, but in the flowing script of everyday Japanese. The characters feel different under his brush, more alive somehow, more immediate. To those who labor with heavy hearts, he writes, know that the Buddha's compassion flows like water, seeking not the high places but the low, not the proud but the humble. The ink flows across the paper with surprising ease. Years of formal training have disciplined his hand, but now he lets that discipline serve a different master. Instead of impressing other scholars with his erudition, he seeks something far more challenging, to make the infinite comprehensible to finite minds without diminishing its power. You understand this tension, don't you? The weight of translating vision into reality, of taking what you see so clearly in your mind and making it accessible to others. The delicate balance between simplification and substance, between reaching people where they are and lifting them to where they could be. As Rennyo writes, he remembers his great-grandfather Shinran's revolutionary insight. That enlightenment comes not through our own efforts, but through trusting in something greater than ourselves. Amida Buddha's infinite compassion, Shinran taught, embraces especially those who feel themselves unworthy, those who struggle, those who fail and try again. But how can this radical grace reach hearts if it remains trapped in language those hearts cannot comprehend? The brush moves across the paper with growing confidence. When you lie awake at night, he writes, worried about tomorrow's burdens, remember that you are held by a love that knows no conditions, no requirements, no impossible standards you must meet. The words are simple, but they carry the weight of centuries of wisdom. This is the art he is learning, to be profound without being obscure, to be accessible without being shallow. Outside his study, he can hear the morning activities of the temple beginning. Monks chanting the traditional sutras in their ancient cadences, the sound beautiful but distant, like music from another world. How many of the people who will come to the temple today will leave feeling more confused than comforted, more excluded than embraced? He sets down his brush and reads what he has written. The characters seem to breathe on the page, each stroke carrying not just meaning, but invitation. This is what he will call his ofumi, his letters. Not formal treatises or scholarly commentaries, but personal communications from one heart to another. Letters that could be read aloud in village squares, copied by hand and passed between neighbors, carried by traveling merchants to distant provinces. But even as the vision clarifies, he feels the first stirrings of resistance. From down the corridor comes the sound of approaching footsteps, measured, deliberate, carrying the authority of established tradition. Master Zonkaku, one of the senior monks, appears at the entrance to his study. His eyes fall immediately on the paper before Rennyo, and his expression shifts almost imperceptibly. Writing in the vernacular again, Zonkaku's voice carries the particular disapproval reserved for promising students who seem to be wasting their gifts. Surely your time would be better spent on proper scholarly work. The teachings of our tradition deserve the dignity of formal presentation. Rennyo feels the familiar tightening in his chest, the same sensation you know when your vision meets the immovable weight of how things have always been done. But he has learned something about this feeling. It is not a warning to retreat, it is a signal that you are approaching something that matters. Master Zonkaku, he says carefully, I wonder, when my great-grandfather Shinran first taught that ordinary people could achieve enlightenment through faith rather than monastic discipline, was that not also considered undignified by some? The older monk's face hardens. That was different. Shinran was responding to the spiritual needs of his time. These are different circumstances. Are they? Rennyo gestures toward the window where the sounds of the awakening city drift through the morning air. Listen, do you hear different hearts, different struggles, different longings for peace? The question hangs between them like a bridge neither wants to cross. Zonkaku's eyes return to the paper on Rennyo's desk, scanning the simple, direct language with the expression of someone examining a suspicious meal. The people respect what they cannot easily understand, he says finally. Mystery creates reverence. Make the teachings too accessible, and they lose their power. But Rennyo has thought about this objection through many sleepless nights. Does the sun lose its power when it shines on everyone equally? Does love become less profound when it is freely given rather than carefully earned? After Zonkaku leaves, clearly unconvinced, Rennyo returns to his writing. But now each character carries additional weight. The knowledge that what he is building challenges not just ignorance, but the very structures that maintain ignorance. The established order has its reasons for keeping wisdom locked away. Accessible truth is dangerous truth. It shifts power. It changes everything. His brush moves more deliberately now. Each stroke an act of quiet rebellion. To the mother who works from dawn until dark and still worries she is not enough, he writes, "You are already embraced by infinite compassion." To the merchant who struggles with honest doubt, your questions are not obstacles to faith, but expressions of it. To all who feel themselves unworthy of grace, you are precisely who grace seeks. The words flow like water finding its level, seeking not the heights of scholarly achievement, but the depths of human need. This is what you are learning too, isn't it? That the most important work often looks deceptively simple from the outside. That making something truly accessible requires far more skill than making it impressively complex. As the morning progresses, Rennyo finds himself entering a state of flow that surprises him. The brush becomes an extension of his intention, the ink a medium for something larger than his individual thoughts. He is not just writing, he is translating, taking the vast cosmic truths his tradition has preserved and rendering them in the intimate language of daily life. When you calculate whether you can meet next month's obligations, he writes, remember that you are held by a security that transcends any earthly accounting. When you face decisions that seem to have no good options, trust that wisdom greater than your own is available to guide you. Each letter becomes a bridge between worlds, the world of eternal truth and the world of temporal struggle, the realm of perfect understanding and the reality of imperfect people doing their best with incomplete information. This is the work that matters most, he realizes, not adding to the mountain of existing commentary, but creating pathways for ordinary hearts to find extraordinary peace. By midday, he has completed his first letter. The paper before him holds perhaps 300 characters, written in a hand that any literate person could read, expressing truths that any struggling heart could receive. It looks so simple, and yet he knows he has crossed a threshold from which there will be no return. The revolution his great-grandfather began with radical theology, Rennyo is continuing with radical accessibility. He is democratizing enlightenment, making the infinite available to finite lives, not through complex philosophical systems, but through the simple, dangerous act of clear communication. The weight of what he is building settles around him like a familiar garment. Opposition will come, not just from conservative monks, but from the entire structure of religious authority that depends on maintaining distance between the sacred and the ordinary. But in his hands the brush feels steady. In his heart the purpose feels clear. The people are waiting. They have always been waiting, and finally someone is writing for them. Yoshizaki-do, a sanctuary in the snow. Years pass like seasons through snow-laden mountains. The letters continue to flow from Rennyo's brush, each one carrying his revolutionary message further into the villages and towns where ordinary people struggle with extraordinary burdens. But revolution, as you know from your own experience, rarely goes unopposed. The conservative monk's resistance hardens into something more dangerous. Political pressure, economic sanctions, and finally, violence. In 1465, the inevitable arrives like a winter storm. Armed monks from Mount Hiei descend upon Honganji, not with arguments but with torches. The temple that has stood for generations. The place where Rennyo first learned to hold a brush, where he discovered his calling to serve the forgotten, burns. But here is what those who carry weight understand about destruction. It often clears the ground for something stronger to grow. Rennyo, now 51, gathers what remains of his community. Scrolls rescued from flames, a few personal belongings, and most precious of all, the people who have found hope in his teachings. Together, they begin a journey north, toward the mountains of Ekizen province, seeking not just refuge but renewal. The path winds through landscapes that mirror the soul's journey through difficulty. Steep mountain passes where each step requires intention. Valleys shrouded in mist where the way forward remains unclear until you're already walking it. And always the weight of responsibility, not just for his own survival, but for the spiritual lives of those who have chosen to follow. You know this weight. The way it settles differently when others depend on your vision, your strength, your ability to find a path forward, even when you cannot see the destination clearly. After weeks of travel, they reach a plateau high in the mountains. Here, where the air is thin and pure, where snow lingers even in late spring, Rennyo makes a decision that will define the next chapter of his life's work. On this remote mountainside, he will build not just a temple, but a community. A place where his vision of accessible Buddhism can take root and flourish, protected by distance from those who would destroy it. He calls it Yoshizaki-do, the temple of good fortune. But fortune, as he understands it, is not the absence of struggle. It is the presence of purpose strong enough to transform struggle into meaning. The first winter at Yoshizaki-do tests everything they believe about community, about faith, about the possibility of building something beautiful in harsh conditions. The wind cuts through the mountains like doubt through conviction. Snow falls so deep that for months the outside world might as well not exist. But inside the simple wooden buildings they've constructed, inside the main hall where oil lamps flicker against hand-carved pillars, something remarkable begins to emerge. Not the formal hierarchical structure of traditional temples, but something more organic, more human. Listen, can you hear it? The sound of morning chanting, but not the complex Sanskrit of scholarly monks. Instead, voices, men and women, young and old, reciting the Nembutsu in their own language, with their own accents, carrying their own hopes. Namo Amida Butsu, a phrase so simple a child can learn it, so profound it can carry a lifetime of seeking. The fire in the central hearth crackles and pops, sending shadows dancing across walls lined with Rennyo's letters. These ofumi, copied and recopied by devoted hands, hang like windows into a different way of understanding the sacred. No longer mysterious pronouncements from distant authorities, but intimate conversations between a teacher and his community about the daily challenges of living with faith. Between the formal services, something even more precious emerges. The murmur of genuine conversation. Farmers sharing the spiritual insights they've discovered while planting rice. Merchants finding parallels between honest trade and honest practice. Mothers and fathers discussing how to raise children who understand both humility and dignity. This is what Rennyo has always envisioned, not religion as escape from ordinary life, but as a way of making ordinary life sacred. As word spreads through the mountain valleys and down into the plains below, people begin to arrive at Yoshizaki-do. Not the wealthy patrons who traditionally supported temples, but the ones Rennyo has always written for. Farmers whose hands are permanently stained with soil. Craftsmen whose backs ache from years of careful labor. Women whose days are filled with the endless, invisible work of keeping households and communities functioning. They come carrying their burdens. Grief for lost children, anxiety about failed harvests, the bone-deep weariness that comes from lives spent serving others with little recognition. But they also come carrying something else. Hope that here, in this remote sanctuary, they might find not answers to all their questions, but acceptance for all their struggles. The community that forms around Yoshizaki-do becomes something unprecedented in Japanese Buddhism. Not a hierarchy with monks at the top and laypeople at the bottom, but a circle where everyone's experience of seeking has value. Where the insights of a rice farmer might illuminate a passage from scripture that scholarly interpretation had obscured. Rennyo moves through this community not as a distant authority, but as a teacher in the truest sense, someone who creates space for others to discover their own wisdom. In the morning, you might find him copying letters by lamplight, preparing teachings that will travel far beyond these mountains. In the afternoon, helping repair a roof damaged by heavy snow. In the evening, sitting by the fire listening to an elderly woman describe how the Nembutsu has helped her face the death of her husband. This is leadership as service. Authority earned not through position, but through presence. The kind of leadership you understand in your bones, even when the weight of it keeps you awake at night. The seasons turn at Yoshizaki-do with a rhythm that nourishes both body and spirit. Spring brings the sound of melting snow rushing down mountainsides, and with it, new arrivals seeking to join the community. The wooden buildings expand organically. New halls for gathering, simple quarters for those who choose to stay permanently, workshops where craftsmen create not just functional items, but objects of beauty that reflect their spiritual practice. Summer fills the mountain air with the scent of wild flowers and the sound of children's laughter. For here, unlike traditional monasteries, families are welcome. Children grow up understanding that spiritual seeking is not separate from daily life, but woven through every moment, present in the careful preparation of meals, in the respectful maintenance of buildings, in the patient teaching of skills from one generation to the next. Autumn brings the spectacular transformation of mountain maples, their leaves turning colors so vivid they seem to burn without consuming themselves. A perfect metaphor for the community Rennyo has built. Intense, beautiful, sustained by something deeper than what appears on the surface. And winter. Winter brings the deep silence that allows for the deepest listening. When snow isolates Yoshizaki-do from the outside world, the community turns inward, not in withdrawal, but in cultivation. Long evenings spent studying Rennyo's letters together, each person finding new layers of meaning based on their own experience. Quiet conversations by firelight, where the barriers between teacher and student, between sacred and ordinary, dissolve into something more honest. The sound you hear now, that gentle crackling, is not just wood burning in a hearth 5 centuries ago. It's the sound of something being refined, purified, made stronger through the application of sustained heat. The sound of a vision becoming reality through the patient work of daily practice. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about Yoshizaki-do is not what happens within its walls, but what flows out from it. Rennyo's letters, copied by devoted hands, travel down from the mountains, carrying the community's spirit into villages and towns across Japan. Each letter becomes a seed of the same radical idea. That spiritual truth belongs not to an elite few, but to anyone willing to receive it with an open heart. The people who visit Yoshizaki-do and return home carry something with them, not just new teachings, but a new understanding of what community can be. They establish their own gatherings, their own study groups, their own ways of supporting each other through life's inevitable difficulties. This is how lasting change happens, not through grand pronouncements from centers of power, but through the patient work of building something so genuinely helpful that people cannot help but share it. Through the creation of communities so nourishing that they inspire the creation of other communities. You understand this, the way real impact spreads not through force but through example. The way what you're building, if it truly serves, will inspire others to build similar things in their own contexts, with their own innovations. As night settles over Yoshizaki-do, as oil lamps are trimmed and banked fires settled for the long mountain darkness, there is a quality of peace that comes only from alignment, between vision and action, between individual seeking and community support, between the weight of responsibility and the strength to carry it with grace. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. The conservative Buddhist establishment has not forgotten Rennyo's revolutionary approach. Political tensions continue to simmer in the world beyond these mountains. But tonight, in this sanctuary built from nothing more than vision and determination, there is proof that something beautiful can emerge from destruction, that community can flourish in the harshest conditions, that the work of making profound truths accessible is not just possible but essential. The snow falls softly outside, adding another layer to the protective silence that surrounds this remarkable community. And in that silence, the sound of what you're building continues, steady as breathing, patient as seasons, strong enough to last, echoes of faith, the commoner's path. But snow melts, seasons turn, and the true measure of what you've built reveals itself not in the sanctuary you create, but in how it lives in the hearts of those who carry it beyond your walls. Spring arrives at Yoshizaki-do with the sound of departing footsteps. Men and women who found refuge in Rennyo's community during the harsh winter months now return to their villages, their farms, their workshops. They carry with them more than memories. They carry a living flame. Picture Jiro, a rice farmer from the valley below. His hands are permanently stained with earth, his back bent from decades of following the plow. For years, he believed the Pure Land was reserved for monks who could afford elaborate rituals, who understood the mysterious Chinese sutras. But here, in Rennyo's simple words, he discovered something revolutionary. Faith requires nothing more than an open heart. Now, as he walks the mountain path toward home, Jiro carries one of Rennyo's letters folded carefully in his sleeve. Written in words he can actually read, in the language of his own thoughts. Entrust yourself completely to Amida Buddha, it says, and you will be saved. No other practice is necessary. How often do we complicate what should be simple? How many barriers do we create between ourselves and the very thing we're trying to build? Jiro reaches his village as morning mist rises from the rice paddies. His neighbors gather around him, curious about his winter absence. And there, beside the communal well, where gossip and news have been shared for generations, something extraordinary happens. This man, who has never considered himself a teacher, begins to speak. "I learned something in the mountains," he says quietly, "about faith, about belonging, about how the Pure Land isn't some distant paradise, but a promise that lives right here." He touches his chest, in the space between one breath and the next. His words are simple, unpolished. He stumbles sometimes, searching for the right phrase. But his neighbors listen, because they hear something they recognize, the voice of someone just like them who has found something real. Within days, they're gathering in Jiro's modest home, a circle of farmers and their wives sharing rice and conversation as the sun sets behind the mountains. No elaborate altar, no mysterious rituals, just ordinary people discovering that the sacred can live in the most common moments, in the blessing of a shared meal, in the honest telling of their struggles, in the simple act of saying together, "I entrust myself to Amida Buddha." Meanwhile, 2 valleys over, Masa the merchant has returned to her fabric shop in a bustling market town. For years, she carried the weight of her trade's moral complexity, the necessity of profit, the fine line between fair dealing and advantage-taking. Buddhist teachings seem to condemn her very livelihood, suggesting that spiritual purity required abandoning worldly concerns. But Rennyo's message offered something different. Not escape from the world, but transformation within it. Amida's compassion, he taught, extends to all beings, regardless of their occupation or circumstances. What matters is not what you do, but how you hold your heart while doing it. Now Masa's shop becomes an unlikely sanctuary. As customers examine silk and cotton, she shares what she learned in the mountains, not as preaching, but as conversation. One person speaking honestly to another about the challenges of living with integrity in a complex world. "I used to think I had to choose," she tells a fellow merchant over tea, "between making a living and being a good Buddhist. But maybe the path is simpler than that. Maybe it's about bringing compassion into whatever work we do, treating customers fairly, helping when we can, remembering that we're all just trying to get by." Her words spread through the merchant community like ripples in still water. Shop owners begin gathering weekly, not to discuss business, but to explore how their faith can inform their daily choices. They discover that the Pure Land teachings don't require them to abandon their worldly responsibilities, but to approach them with different hearts. And in the mountain village of Kurama, old Kenji the woodcarver sits in his workshop, his arthritic hands moving slowly but surely across a piece of cherry wood. He, too, spent the winter at Yoshizaki-do, drawn initially not by spiritual hunger, but by simple need. His grown children had moved to distant cities, leaving him alone with his craft and his memories. At Rennyo's community, he found something he hadn't expected. Not just shelter from the cold, but recognition of his own worth. Every person, Rennyo taught, carries the Buddha nature within them. The farmer, the merchant, the craftsman. Each life has equal dignity in Amida's eyes. For Kenji, these words unlocked something profound. His wood carving, which he had always seen as merely practical work, suddenly revealed itself as something more, a form of prayer, a way of participating in creation itself. Each careful cut, each patient smoothing of grain became an act of devotion. Now, back in his village workshop, Kenji's craft takes on new meaning. The small Buddha statues he carves are not elaborate works of religious art, but humble expressions of faith that ordinary people can afford. He gives many away, to families facing hardship, to travelers seeking protection, to anyone who seems to need a tangible reminder that they are not alone. But more than this, his workshop becomes a gathering place. Village children stop by to watch him work, drawn by the peaceful concentration that surrounds him. Young parents seek his advice, recognizing in his weathered face a quality of acceptance they rarely find elsewhere. And slowly, naturally, conversations turn to matters of faith. "Tell us about the mountain temple," they ask, and Kenji, who never considered himself eloquent, finds words to share what he discovered. that the Pure Land is not a distant reward for perfect behavior, but a present reality for imperfect people who dare to trust in something larger than themselves. This is how revolutions truly spread, isn't it? Not through grand proclamations or institutional mandates, but through the quiet testimony of changed lives. Through farmers and merchants and craftsmen who return to their ordinary worlds carrying extraordinary news. That faith is simpler than they thought, that belonging is possible, that the sacred lives not in distant temples, but in the space between one honest conversation and the next. Rennyo, still teaching at Yoshizaki-do, begins to hear reports of these spontaneous communities. Letters arrive from villages across the region, written in the simple Japanese he championed, telling stories of transformation. A group of fishermen who gather each morning before launching their boats, sharing a moment of gratitude and mutual blessing. A circle of women who meet while washing clothes at the river, finding in their shared labor an opportunity for spiritual fellowship. A band of traveling merchants who carry Rennyo's teachings from town to town, not as formal missionaries but as friends sharing good news. Each story confirms what Rennyo always believed, that profound truths, when expressed simply enough, have the power to take root anywhere. That ordinary people, given access to authentic spiritual nourishment, will create their own forms of practice and community. That faith, like water, finds its own level when artificial barriers are removed. The weight you carry tonight, the responsibility of building something meaningful, of creating value in the world, of making decisions that affect others. This weight is not so different from what those medieval farmers and merchants carried. They too lay awake, wondering if they were doing enough, being enough, building something that would last. What they discovered, through Rennyo's simple teaching, was that the foundation of any worthy endeavor is not perfect knowledge or flawless execution, but faith. Faith that your efforts matter. Faith that your work serves something larger than yourself. Faith that even when you cannot see the full picture, your contribution has value. The Pure Land they found was not escape from responsibility, but the ground of true responsibility. The recognition that you are held by something vast and compassionate, something that can sustain you through uncertainty and failure, something that transforms even your mistakes into opportunities for deeper wisdom. And perhaps this is what you need to remember as your own day finally settles into stillness. You are not building alone. The work you do, the care you take, the weight you carry. All of this is held within something larger. Your efforts, like those rice seeds Jiro planted each spring, are part of a harvest you may never fully see but can trust completely. The echoes of faith that began in a mountain temple 6 centuries ago continue still. In every person who chooses compassion over profit, community over isolation, trust over fear. In every leader who remembers that their true work is not just building businesses or organizations, but building the kind of world where ordinary people can flourish. Rest now in that knowledge that what you're building is part of something ancient and ongoing, something as patient as seasons, as enduring as mountains, as gentle as snow falling on temple roofs in the deep of winter. Legacy of light, Rennyo's enduring influence. And in the years that followed Rennyo's passing, something remarkable unfolded across the landscape of Japan. Not the dramatic sweep of armies or the sudden proclamation of new laws, but something quieter, more profound. The seeds he had planted in ordinary hearts began to bloom in ways even he might not have imagined. You see, what Rennyo had truly given his people was not just a new way to practice Buddhism, but a new way to understand themselves. For centuries, spiritual wisdom had been locked away behind walls of complexity, guarded by those who believed that truth was too precious, too dangerous to share freely. But Rennyo had dared to trust that ordinary people could hold extraordinary truths with the same reverence as any scholar or priest. In the villages where his followers had returned, in the workshops where craftsmen bent over their tools, in the fields where farmers tended their rice, something had shifted. The old boundaries between sacred and secular began to dissolve. A merchant counting coins could feel the presence of the infinite. A mother nursing her child could touch the heart of compassion itself. A blacksmith shaping iron could participate in the ancient dance of creation. This was Rennyo's true revolution, not the overthrow of old institutions, but the quiet recognition that every human life, however humble, however burdened, was already sacred. already complete, already worthy of the deepest truths the universe had to offer. The letters he had written, those simple, direct messages in the language of common people, continued to circulate long after his voice had fallen silent. Copied by hand, passed from village to village, read aloud in gathering places where ordinary people came together to share their struggles and their hopes. Each letter a bridge across the gap between the profound and the practical, between ancient wisdom and immediate need. And slowly, something unprecedented began to emerge. Not just individual awakening, but awakened communities. Groups of people who had learned to see their daily work as spiritual practice, their relationships as opportunities for compassion, their challenges as invitations to trust something larger than their own understanding. These communities became centers of stability in a still turbulent world. Places where travelers could find shelter, where the hungry could find food, where those carrying impossible burdens could find others willing to help bear the weight. They became living demonstrations that Rennyo's vision was not just beautiful theory, but practical wisdom that could transform the texture of human life itself. The established Buddhist institutions, those same authorities who had once driven Rennyo from Kyoto, began to take notice. Some with concern, watching as their exclusive hold on spiritual authority continued to slip away. Others with curiosity, even admiration, as they witnessed the fruits of this radical accessibility. How could teaching so simple produce transformations so profound? How could faith so unpretentious generate communities so resilient? But perhaps the most remarkable thing was how Rennyo's influence began to shape the very character of Japanese Buddhism itself. Other schools, other teachers, began to adopt his innovations. The use of vernacular language in religious instruction, the emphasis on making profound truths accessible to ordinary people, the recognition that spiritual wisdom belonged not just in monasteries and temples, but in homes and workshops and marketplaces. It was as if Rennyo had opened a door that could never quite be closed again. A door between the realm of the sacred and the world of daily life, between ancient wisdom and immediate experience, between the few who had always held spiritual authority and the many who had always hungered for spiritual nourishment. And in Kyoto, on the site where the original Hongan-ji had once stood before its destruction, something beautiful began to take shape. Stone by stone, beam by beam, a new temple rose from the ashes of the old. But this was not merely reconstruction. It was transformation. The new Hongan-ji would be different, larger, more welcoming, designed not just for monks and scholars, but for all those ordinary people whose lives Rennyo had touched. Picture it now. This temple as it would become. Not the fortress-like structure that had once stood here, guarded and exclusive, but something more like a great open heart. Courtyards where farmers could gather after harvest. Halls where merchants could pause in their travels. Spaces where families could come to mark the passages of their lives. Birth and marriage and death, all held within the embrace of something larger than themselves. The sound of bells would ring out over Kyoto again. But now they would call not just the religiously trained, but anyone who needed reminding that they were not alone in this world, that their struggles mattered, that their small acts of kindness rippled outward in ways they might never see, that what they were building in their own lives, their own communities, their own quiet corners of the world, was part of something ancient and ongoing. And visitors would come, from across Japan and eventually from across the world, drawn not by the grandeur of the architecture, but by something less tangible. The sense that here was a place where ordinary human life was honored, where the weight you carry was understood, where the vision you're nurturing was recognized as sacred work. This is Rennyo's true legacy, not the temples that bear his name or the texts that preserve his words, but the quiet revolution he began in human hearts. The recognition that spiritual wisdom belongs not to the few, but to all, that profound truths are most powerful when they're accessible, that what transforms the world is not grand gestures, but the accumulated weight of countless small acts of faith and compassion. Even now, centuries later, in boardrooms and workshops, in hospitals and schools, in all the places where people gather to do the work of building a better world, his influence continues. In every leader who chooses clarity over complexity, who trusts their people with difficult truths, who remembers that their real work is not just achieving goals, but nurturing the human spirits who make achievement possible. Rest now in that continuity, that great river of wisdom flowing through time, carrying forward the best of what each generation discovers about how to live with courage, compassion, and trust. You are part of that river. What you're building is part of that flow, and the light you kindle today will illuminate paths you'll never see, touch lives you'll never meet, inspire work that will continue long after your own voice has joined the great silence. The bells of Kyoto ring on, calling each generation to remember what matters most, and restful peace. And in this moment, as you lie here in the quiet darkness, you too are part of that ancient current, that endless flow of builders and dreamers who have chosen to create rather than merely consume. The weight you carry tonight, it connects you to Rennyo in his mountain temple, writing by candlelight, wondering if his words would reach the hearts that needed them most. He could not have imagined the millions who would find comfort in his simple letters. Just as you cannot see the full ripple of what you're building now, let your breathing deepen like the slow rhythm of temple bells across still water. Feel your shoulders settling into the softness beneath you, the way evening mist settles into the valleys around Yoshizaki-do. The urgent thoughts that followed you to bed, they're like clouds drifting across the face of the moon, present for a moment, then dissolving into the vast night sky. In that mountain sanctuary, the sound of evening chanting would rise and fall like gentle waves, voices joining together in something larger than themselves. Your work, too, is part of that chorus. Each decision you make, each person you serve, adding your voice to the great song of human flourishing. The communities Rennyo built were not perfect. They faced winters of doubt and seasons of struggle. Yet they endured because they were rooted in something deeper than ambition, something that nourishes rather than depletes. Feel that same nourishment now, flowing through your tired limbs like warm water, washing away the residue of the day's battles, the incense that burned in those temple halls, sandalwood and cedar. Imagine that gentle fragrance surrounding you now, purifying the air you breathe, creating sacred space around your rest. Your mind, so accustomed to racing ahead to tomorrow's challenges, can finally slow to the pace of your heartbeat, steady and sure as the wooden fish drum that marked the hours of prayer. The letters Rennyo wrote by lamplight, they carried the warmth of human understanding from his hands to hearts across Japan, just as your work carries forward the ancient human project of making life better for those who come after us. In the darkness of his study, surrounded by scrolls and brushes, he could not have known that his simple words would echo through centuries, that farmers would find courage in them, that merchants would discover integrity, that countless ordinary people would learn to see their daily work as sacred calling. The gentle breeze that moved through the temple gardens, stirring the bamboo leaves into whispered conversations. Let it move through your thoughts now, dispersing the accumulated tension, carrying away what no longer serves you. Your breathing grows deeper still, like the slow inhalation of morning mist rising from the lake, like the patient exhalation of mountains holding their ancient vigil. In the end, what mattered most to Rennyo was not the grand temple or the thousands who came to hear him teach, but the quiet transformation that happened one heart at a time, one letter at a time, one act of compassion at a time. What you're building matters in the same way, not for its size or recognition, but for its contribution to the great work of human flourishing. And as the temple bells fade into the distance of dreams and your breathing joins the eternal rhythm of rest, you can release the weight of tomorrow into the gentle hands of sleep, knowing that what you carry is part of something beautiful and enduring, and that your work, like Rennyo's letters, will find its way to exactly the hearts that need it most.